I'm leaving again.
City on it.
Nalelo batani kokoliko.
ZambiaMusicBlog.co.
I'm thankful that I'm leaving again.
City on it.
Nalelo batani kokoliko.
ZambiaMusicBlog.co.
I'm thankful that I'm leaving again.
City on it.
Nalelo batani kokoliko.
ZambiaMusicBlog.co.
I'm thankful that I'm leaving again.
City on it.
Nalelo batani kokoliko.
ZambiaMusicBlog.co.
I'm thankful that I'm leaving again.
City on it.
The year 2020 will be recorded more readily for the shifts in the sporting season as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, rather than examples of stellar sporting excellence. Restrictions on movement, physical activity, and mass gatherings because of COVID-19 pandemic have had major implications for athletes and players, with restrictions of access to training venues, cancellation of events, and the loss of earnings in some instances. These implications can have commensurate psychological consequences. Today on Coronavirus and EU, we discuss the impact of COVID-19 on athletes. How are athletes and partners in sport coping with such an emergence? To help me answer this and many more questions, I have Dr. Hikabwa Chipende, lecturer and researcher at the University of Zambia. He holds a diploma in education, physical education and sport, Bachelor of Science and Master of Science in Sports Science, and a PhD in sports history. He worked as a secondary school teacher, has worked for Sport for Development organization called Sports Coaches Outreach in South Africa, worked for Supreme Council for Sports in Africa Zone 6 in Botswana, now Africa Union Sports Council Region 5, and now lecturer and researcher in sports at University of Zambia. Trust me, when I grow up, I want to be like that. Dr. Hikabwa Chipende, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stangala, and it's my pleasure to be here.
We are honored. First and foremost, I know I've given a bit of background about you. Just tell us a bit about yourself, especially what you are doing at UNZA and how you are helping developing sport in Zambia.
Sure, thank you, Dr. Stangala. Yes, I think you have already kind of outlined my background. I'm trained as a physical education and sports teacher, and I trained at Nkrumah Teachers College then, which is now Kwame Nkrumah University. Mm-hmm. And thereafter I studied for a bachelor in sports science at the Norwegian School of Sports Science in Oslo, and my master's also I got it at the Norwegian School of Sports Science in sports science. And thereafter I went to do a PhD at Michigan State University in the USA. And when I graduated from the US, then I came and got a teaching and lecturing position at the University of Zambia. Mm-hmm. So getting into what I'm doing at the University of Zambia and how I'm contributing towards sports development in the country. Firstly, part of my job requirements at the University of Zambia is research and writing, meaning researching and writing scholarly articles. So I research and write on the political and social history of sports. And basically this involves examining or sitting sports in society.
Yeah.
You know, sport does not exist in a vacuum. So it exists in a society that has political, social, and economic implications to sport. So basically, I examine how sports is impacting people's lives in society, and how actually the people themselves are also changing or influencing sports based on their cultural, social, economic and political experiences.
Yeah.
So basically the research part, that's what I do, and I believe that that is very important, because normally in sports we tend to throw so much interest on sports science, but we forget kind of broad aspects that actually inform or influence people's interests and participation in sports. Yeah. Like in this case, we are discussing, the impact of COVID-19 on sports. So basically, those that I grapple with, that I research and write on at the University of Zambia. And then I also lecture masters. Last year, we introduced a master's degree program in physical education and sports. Wow. And most of our students in this program are lecturers, lecturers and teachers in teacher training colleges, universities, and physical education sports teachers in schools. Basically, these are the people who actually are at the core of orienting our young people in terms of physical literacy at the grassroots in schools and communities. And the idea here is to ensure that we provide them with quality sports education, to ensure that then they can actually introduce quality physical activities and orient our young people to quality sports skills. Yeah. So in a nutshell, that is the little contribution that I'm making at the University of Zambia.
Great. We are live on Prism Africa-LITOVIA TV. Or if you have access to internet, we are live on Facebook as well as YouTube. Just search for coronavirus and sport, or search for my name. You'll be directed to where the live link is. Okay, and of course, for those of you that want to call to ask a question or make a contribution to this very important topic, please, there's a number on the screen. Call that or text it. We'll be glad to hear from you. Doc, now let's get into the nitty-gritties. But as you were giving the introduction about what you do, I got interested in asking a question that I don't have on my script.
Sure.
Would you agree, from your research experience and evidence, that sport is a vehicle for development?
Yes, broadly, yeah, that's a very good question, Doc. And broadly, I have a lot of interest in that question, from not only from an academic standpoint, but from a practitioner standpoint as well. As you mentioned in the introduction, I worked for sports for development organizations. I worked in South Africa for a couple of years, and then I worked here as well as national coordinator or country manager for an organization called Sports Coaches Outreach, in which we were using sports as a tool for mobilizing communities to share with them sustainable development agendas and programs. So basically, from that point of view, and there's a lot of evidence, of course, that points to the fact that sport, if utilized very well, can play a role in mobilizing people and enhancing or promoting sustainable development agendas. But of course, we should be very careful that we don't over-dramatize the role of sport. Sport itself cannot change lives. So we need to be very careful with how we use it. Of course, now from an academic standpoint, because there is quite a lot of evidence that it can play a role, but if used properly and cautiously. But of course, recently there had been a lot of literature that has been emerging in terms of critiquing, the field of development. Definitely the field of development, or the international development agendas and programs. And sport is entangled within those critiques as well, which demand for us to be more reflective and careful in how we use it. So to answer your question, Doc, yes, there is evidence that if used carefully, sport can be used actually to mobilize communities, because it appeals to everyone, regardless of social, cultural, economic, or ethnic background. So it can be used as a tool for mobilizing communities. But of course, we need to use it carefully. because if we don't use it carefully, it can also actually divide communities, and it can actually work against the development agenda.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Now, let's get back to our discussion of interest today. Generally, we have seen that as a result of the coronavirus pandemic, a lot, if not all, of sporting activities have been suspended. And we have seen stay-at-home rules being applied to all, including athletes, okay? But this could have different negative impact on the athletes. Do you think this is a genuine concern that we should be discussing right now? Do these stay-at-home rules have potential to affect athletes negatively?
A very good and critical question, Doc. It is actually worthwhile that we are discussing these issues. And the stay-at-home rules can indeed affect athletes' performance, especially elite athletes. You know, there is...
why only elite? What about amateur?
Oh yes, broadly, like
my
almost everyone.
IVC.
Yeah, I totally agree, Doc. I totally agree. Yeah, you know, and that is a very good question, Doc, because we have a tendency of leaning on elite athletes, but you know, definitely the stay-at-home rules are affecting, you know, elite athletes and mass participation in sports as well. Yes, and but let me take the part of first the part of, you know, elite athletes, and including even you know, mass sports.
Yeah.
So there is in sports science there is what they call detraining, and now this is the loss of training-induced physiological and performance adaptation. In short, it means the loss of physical fitness and performance. So meaning that when an athlete, especially the athletes that participate in these physical intensive sports that require a lot of physical fitness, so when they train for a very long time, their body system, particularly the respiratory system, adapts to meet the high intensity physical activities that the body is subjected to.
Yeah.
So meaning that, you know, for example, you know, the uptake of, you know, oxygen, you know, the increase in the volume of, you know, oxygenated blood that is pumped to the tissues and muscles to provide energy to perform the vigorous activities, and the whole system, it means that the whole respiratory system then adapts to these vigorous physical activities or exercises. So, but it takes a very long time for an elite athlete to reach that point. That's right, Doc. So apart from the physiological part, reaching that balance as a result of a long-term training, the regular, you know, practice of sports skills, sports tactics, execution of sports plays, it also balances up with the physiological balance. So hence then it makes the whole body prepared to execute sports skills with precision, you know, execute plays and compete competitively. So now the detraining, the lack of training, entails that the body then starts losing this training-induced physiological and performance adaptation. Yeah. So, and the longer it takes for athletes in the detraining time, the longer it will take for athletes
to get back to where they used to be.
Yes, to get back to kind of, you know, readapt their bodies to these physiological and performance standards. So basically that is the first part. And then the second part is that there is also a very strong interaction, Doc, between thought, body and emotions. So the moment the body reaches that physiological and training-induced physiological and performance adaptation, thought patterns and emotions are well informed as well, that the body is ready and I am ready to perform. But the moment the body loses that, the mind also clearly...
It's been over 3 months staying at home.
Exactly.
I'm worried from what you have said. I'm worried. But we'll get back to the details of that discussion.
Sure.
We have on phone Mr. Kambi,
Sure, wonderful.
who is going to help us just for a few minutes.
Sure.
What is the situation on the ground regarding the availability of sports nutrition? Our NOCZ affiliate as well as sports psychology.
Sure.
Hello?
Mr. Kambi, thank you so much for joining us today on coronavirus and you, where we are discussing the impact of coronavirus on athletes in Zambia.
Thank you.
I have a very important question, sir, but first and foremost to the dear viewers, Mr. Kambi is the Secretary General of the National Olympic Committee of Zambia. And sir, the question is simple and straightforward. When you look at the national sports federations that are affiliated to the National Olympic Committee of Zambia, perhaps generally even those that are not affiliated to NOC, but they are members of the National Sports Council of Zambia, how would you describe the availability of sports nutrition and sports psychology in these federations?
Yeah, first of all, I think it's one area that we've done for a while now. How do athletes manage their nutritional supplements? And also, how do athletes get prepared when they are going to major competition?
Yes.
I'm aware that when we camp athletes as NOC to some of these major games, we do reach out. There's one psychologist that is based in Hikabwa, but I think he's been off the air for some time. Mm-hmm. But that's one area that we national federations I think needs to embark on. They need to invest in it because with the way that sport now is, it's becoming very scientific. We definitely need to have a scientific position to work on to support the athletes in terms of their mindset when they are going to major competition.
Absolutely.
Competition, because that determines the difference between a winner and and a loser. Because they may have the talent, the skill, but at the end of the day, it is what the mindset they have just before a final competition, and I think that's very important. And I think that within the next strategic plan for NOC, that is one area objective that we will have to strongly put in there and try to find partners and how we can support the federations to ensure that the two areas of nutrition and psychology become part of a compliance issue in terms of a coaching bench.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. Do you think these stay-at-home rules that have been imposed on everyone, including athletes, as a result of coronavirus, will make the situation worse for our athletes, especially elite athletes? As they are staying at home, they may not have access to proper nutrition, or they may not have access to psychological welfare, regardless of the level. Do you think that it's making the situation worse?
I think in terms of nutrition, because they are in a home environment where they control what they're eating and with support from their coaches, they should be able to at least supplement and be able to take rightly. But as regards psychology, yes, there will be an impact, because remember that some of the sports codes, they need to have partners to train, and every so often have frequent competition, even if they are just for training purposes. And with that element missing, their mindset also will get affected. So our view is that once physical contact and or corona does pass away and they begin to have physical training, that particular area of sports psychology needs to be enhanced right at the beginning as they begin to get into this, because it's like they will now get into a new era all over again, and even those fears they may have had before as a result of good training may begin to come back.
Yeah.
And so it will take a bit of time for them to be worked through. And I think we would like to urge the coaches that are available to begin to explore opportunities and areas where they can begin to attach, even just through research, and speak to in terms of counseling to some of the athletes.
What would be your last word to especially the Olympic-bound athletes as they are staying at home right now?
Yeah, generally, not only to them, but to all of them, I think it's important to stay focused in terms of the goal that they have already achieved, qualification to Olympic Games.
Yeah.
And within their own space, do everything possible, one, to keep themselves in good condition from a health perspective, as well as from a physical perspective. Obviously, the preparation of muscles for the particular competition might not be enhanced because they're in a small environment, but at least keep the levels of fitness to such an extent that their heart will be able to absorb when they begin to have a more intensive training afterwards.
Yeah.
And because they have qualified as an opportunity to represent the country and their own families, and I think they need to put that at the head of their planning and their focusing, and use every opportunity, even through research and so on, and research some of the other new ways of how to enhance some of the training in order to ensure that their muscle caliber continues to get the pressurized development that they need for the competition.
Secretary General Kambi, thank you so much.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
Doc, we don't have sports psychologists or sports nutrition. Does that concern you?
Well, very serious concern, Doc. Very, very serious concern. Building on what the General Secretary of the National Sports, the National Olympic Committee of Zambia pointed out, we really need as a country to start mobilizing ourselves and take a scientific approach to sports if we to manage to compete favorably at international level. And we can actually, it's important, Doc, that we are aware of our social economic situation in the country, that every federation, it's not possible that every federation, every club can afford to have a qualified sports psychologist with a bachelor degree in sports psychology or master's degree sports psychology on their payroll and sitting on the bench. However, building on the point that Mr. Kambi pointed out, and I'm happy that he mentioned that the National Olympic Committee of Zambia is going to look to this in their next strategic plan.
That was very, very critical.
Brilliant, yes, brilliant, because all we need to do is to actually work within our socio-economic context. We need to stop making excuses that, we don't have this and that and we can't do this and that. If we mobilize ourselves and put our heads together, as he pointed out, in terms of sports psychologists, for example, I know that there are a few people that have some training in sports and exercise psychology at a very good level, actually, up to master's degree level.
Right here in Zambia?
Here in Zambia, yes. He mentioned of one gentleman in Kabwe, who is Mr. Mbewe, Mr. Sylvester Mbewe, who got a master's degree at the Norwegian School of Sports Science. And then myself, I also studied sports and exercise psychology to master's degree level at the Norwegian School of Sports Science. I know of another colleague of mine, Professor Oscar Mwanga, who is based in the UK.
Let's take a call. Thank you so much for calling on this program. May we know who is calling and where you're calling from?
Good morning, Dr. Stangala. This is Mr. Kevin Mlenga.
Thank you so much for calling, Mr. Mlenga. You are perhaps one of the psychologists we should be hearing from you. What is your contribution on this program?
Yes, it's good to hear from you, Doctor, mentioning all those important things about the importance of community and sport. But what I'd like to talk about is, COVID-19, the way it has come around is that the sports men have not been mingling with other people.
Yes.
So most sportsmen actually require the presence of others to perform better. When they're just performing on their own, alone, or training alone, or trying to achieve something on their own, their performance must go down. So what happens is that in terms of the presence of the other, what we call in psychology social facilitation, it can actually make sports persons improve their performance just by the mere presence of others and the co-action of others. So this is very, very important, and I just wanted to highlight that because of social distancing, because of this social isolation, therefore the performance of sportsmen, whether elite or non-elite, can go down because of the lack of presence of others. Yeah, that was my comment.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mlenga, for calling.
All right, okay, thank you. All right, thank you.
Mr. K. Mlenga actually taught me psychology at bachelor's at University of Zambia, that being my first degree.
Wonderful.
And he taught me clinical child neuropsychology.
Okay.
And actually I featured him on this program through phone call though,
Sure.
last week.
Wonderful.
And he's talking about the importance of social facilitation
Yes.
and the impact this can have on, because most athletes, if not all of them, ride on team
Yes,
availability
yes,
and
yes.
team presence.
Yes,
Now, if
yes,
you isolate somebody outside to be alone on their own, obviously it could have some impact on that one. Thank you so much, Mr. Mlenga, once again.
Indeed.
Let's move on. I know that I'm seeing quite a lot of comments on our live broadcast on Facebook, but I think we should run through our questions before we can get to that. But still, I should remind you, please call or to ask a question or to make a contribution. I would be glad to hear from you on what you think is the impact of coronavirus on our athletes. Now, Doc, there are concerns that athletes may be physically inactive, they may spend more time watching TV, they may have distorted sleep patterns, as well as start eating terrible diets, like we have already alluded to. I'm one of those people that believe, from my public health knowledge, that this may lead to unnecessary weight gain. Do you think this is a concern?
Yes, indeed, Doc. Very good observation. But before I get to that question, Doc, allow me to build on Mr. Mlenga's point and Mr. Kambikambi's point. Mr. Mlenga's point is very, very important. And in addition to that, you know, Mr. Kambikambi was talking about athletes, that some of them that have already qualified for the Olympic Games and some of them that are working towards qualification for the Olympic Games. And then, you know, this confinement, lack of training and the aspect that Mr. Mlenga raised has actually a lot of potential to raise anxiety amongst athletes, serious anxiety. And in sports, anxiety is a very, very important issue, or very critical issue. In addition to that, because of, you know, the efforts that they will have already put in training and geared to compete, and now they are seeing themselves losing that, you know, induced physiological and performance balance that we talked about. Some of them can easily slip into depression. And that is where we need the issue of psychologists. And I was just trying to build on the point that we should not make excuses as a country, because we can mobilize ourselves and ensure that we develop a framework of, you know, psychologists that can build their insights to be sports psychologists to actually support athletes at their different levels of development in terms of performance and their welfare. So that is why I'm very happy with Mr. Kambika.
So it's possible, sorry, Doctor, for cutting you, it's possible that federations can come together and employ one or two, and all of them contribute towards the upkeep of that person, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, Doc. And you know, like I mentioned earlier, we have got a few, because there's a slight difference between sports psychologists and applied sports psychologists. So applied sports psychology is slightly different from the academic aspects that we teach in the university. But what we can do is that we can gather the few people that have insights in sports psychology and engage them and ask them to research, gain better insights in terms of the evolving trends in sports and in applied sports psychology. Look for quality and informative objective, literature, trending literature, and also tap into the networks of influential applied sports psychologists to actually build resources where maybe 2 or 3 people can be actually trained or oriented to be sports psychologists. And these can in turn start conducting workshops to support even, because this is not only needed at a national level, because we don't only need sports and exercise psychology at national level, it is needed actually going as low as club level.
Yes, yes.
So it means that if we create a framework where we have national leaders that can develop this content and the framework and insights, and then we conduct regular workshops to kind of train more people that work with teams, that know the context of the sports, that work every day with those sports, then it means that we can, like I mentioned, we cannot have, an opportunity to employ, every club cannot manage to employ a sports psychologist. But through that, we can have 2 or 3 national sports psychologists that we can be counting on that can actually be, building insights and deepening their knowledge and trends in sports psychology, and then training the others. And then it means that then as a country, at least we can be in a position to, support, enhance the athletes' performance and support them with their welfare. And that doc also applies to sports nutrition. As far as I know, we do not have any qualified sports nutrition in the country.
Not at all.
But we have got nutritionists, general nutritionists. Of course, there's a very big difference. We should not make a mistake to think that general nutrition is the same as sports nutrition, or general psychology is the same as sports psychology. But there are people who are general psychologists, like Mr. Mlenga, who already has interest. That was Mr. Mlenga who called, right?
Yes.
Who can actually, with, tapping into networks of, people that specialize in that. We can mobilize, materials, insights, the trending, evolving, trends in terms of elite performance, nutrition requirements, psychological requirements. And when we mobilize those resources, it's easy to support general nutritionists to offer these, starting at national level and going downwards. But we cannot leave the issue of sports nutrition to coaches, because they might not have depth there.
And by the way, they're doing it, right? I mean, they are offering that service, even if they don't have the... let me ask it in a better way.
Sure.
We have coaches.
Yes.
Most of them are former athletes themselves.
That's right.
The experience they've had interacting with other, like in other countries.
That's right.
They're using that knowledge to teach the current athletes.
Yes.
But they're not really qualified. They're not nutritionists themselves.
No, they are not, but they play a role.
Yeah,
they play a role, which is very important, which is already very important. But then in addition to that, why we need people who somehow specialize in these areas, Doc, is that the more competitive it gets, it's just like in academic circles.
Yeah.
The higher it gets, the more compartmentalized it gets, and the more specialized the insights get, such that, a coach has to think about the technical and tactical aspects of the game and the plays. And if you want a coach to start researching and deepening his insights in the nutrition of his athletes, it means that, he cannot manage to specialize thoroughly in nutrition, in psychology, in physical activity and health and fitness, and in technical and tactical. That's why you find that, organized clubs have got a chain of, support staff that actually specialize in these different fields. So to support the coaches in these aspects, such as sports psychology, sports nutrition, that's where from a national level, a policy level, like Mr. Kambi pointed out, if that is planned properly, then a framework can be set where we can have, resources that can be put together, human and material content resource that can be shared with people that have interest to support coaches and sports administrators in implementing some of these things, such as, nutrition, psychology, and medicine, and many others.
Yeah, thank you so much. Now, obviously, at this particular time, as you rightly said, we cannot pretend that we have all the resources that we need to have all these things that we are talking about.
No.
But given the fact that athletes are home right now,
yes,
they are home. obviously there is one or two things we can do within the resources we have to assist them with whatever service we can, or whatever level of service delivery we can afford. Do you think this is time to start thinking about digital platforms, such as psychology or nutrition-oriented digital tools and apps?
That's right, Doc. And you know, those are some of the good things that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought out. Because, you know, it has made us realize that actually in our sports education and practice, we need to put center stage, you know, digital platforms. And Doc, I doubt if there are any athletes wherever they are, whether it's in the poorest township or the most elite residential or suburb, I doubt if there is any of our athletes who are not on any of these digital or social media platforms, like, you know, Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter, Instagram, and many others. So that, Doc, is the way to go. And not only during the COVID pandemic, but even beyond COVID pandemic, because then the COVID pandemic has shown us that actually we are in a position to interact with our athletes on a daily basis. And by creating these platforms where, but the fundamental to the creation, to the use of the platform is the development of these resources that I mentioned, or the material that we need to share with the athletes, and then develop these platforms, and then, you know, have, you know, materials such as videos in all aspects of sport. Coaching, for example, a coach can be seated in the comfort of his home, but, you know, sit the way we are seated like this, you know, shoot a short video of how to execute or how to train a certain skill, or how to enhance an athlete's physical capabilities in the COVID-19 pandemic, during the COVID-19 pandemic, and you know, share these short materials and insights on these social media platforms, and then they end up to be as good as you know, in real time. And the beauty of the digital platforms is that they are also interactive. Where we are talking about things like, you know, anxiety and depression and dietary issues of our athletes, there is interaction on these digital platforms where, you know, there can be a pool where all athletes can actually access this information, and also at the same time, athletes that have individual complications can have an opportunity to ask questions. Very interactive. And the beauty, Doc, is I believe in democratizing knowledge. Because if, for example, there are issues that some athletes are grappling with and they are set on these platforms, the insights that will come from other athletes as to how they are coping with some of those challenges and how they are coping with, because, you know, we can talk about dietary issues. Imagine that, you know, our socio-economic situation might not allow every athlete to actually access the nutrients that are required, you know, to continue kind of, you know, being, you know, mentally and physically fit. But, you know, with interaction in these social media platforms, I just watched a video on BBC by a lady, a Zambian nutritionist based in the UK, Linia Patel. And she was explaining the nutritional value of African foods for different sports, right? And this is the insights that we need. So we don't necessarily need to think about Western foods and all these dietary supplements that are so expensive. But what we need, Doc, is knowledge. What we need is knowledge to invest in understanding critically those that are performing well. What trends and insights do they have? What are the nutritional values of different foods that we have right now? Katapa, you know, Nshima, Kalembra, and all these. You find that they might have all the minerals and nutrients that are required actually for elite performance. And this is where actually the digital platforms can play a critical role.
Absolutely. I like the sound of this. Perhaps this is a call for research on our own local food and how we can put this into some searchable documents for database. For instance, what can Fisash do to
Exactly.
to somebody playing golf or to somebody playing tennis and all those things. And if really there's evidence, why should we worry about food supplements that are coming from abroad, which are very expensive?
Sure, Doc.
Now, Doc, without coronavirus, the sports industry globally is worth $756 billion annually. It's a very huge industry.
Yes.
But with the coronavirus, that has come to below 50%. That has come to below 250 billion per year. And this could imply that some athletes have lost income, that some clubs have lost income, that some merchandise shops have lost income. Do you think this is a concern for Zambian athletes?
Very much. Particularly that as you pointed in the preamble that Zambian sports is more amateurish than professional. So this means that, most of our clubs and sports programs are self-financed. And the minimal resources that are used to run the programs are aimed around, competitions, gate-takings, and other financial, raising ventures that are around events, right? So meaning that, the lack of, competitions, matches, and games has actually seriously affected athletes, particularly those that are, from sports that are self-financed, seriously affected, because as little as those, allowances, winning bonuses might be, they make a huge change in the lives of athletes. And not only athletes, you'll be surprised to find that an athlete is given an allowance probably of just like 50 kwacha or 100 kwacha per day. Probably that is what sustains the family at home in terms of buying vegetables, buying cooking oil, and a few other amenities that might be required to support the survival of the athletes. So indeed, this has a very serious financial implication on the athletes, and not only on the athletes, but like you mentioned, there is a chain of businesses that are linked to sports, right? Hotels that provide amenities and other support services for athletes, and many others. And this can go down to young boys that sell drinks at football matches, and Vanamlenga who lives in probably in a rural area, and every Sunday makes fritters and goes to sell during the social afternoon football match to support her son or school-going children. So the effect goes even beyond the athletes. Doc.
Absolutely. Yes. On a positive note, how can we use sport to overcome COVID-19? Can we use sport as a vehicle in one way or the other to help control coronavirus? How?
Yes, Doc. We can use sports to play a contribution. Maybe not to stop COVID-19, because that would be a bit complex, but probably to play a role in terms of preventing the spread of COVID-19. Firstly, Doc, I think we talked in the introduction. We talked about social mass sports, right? So sports and physical exercises are very important, to everyone in terms of lightening the mood and the well-being of individuals and the functioning of the cognitive functioning and many other aspects. So during this coronavirus situation, it's important that individuals involve themselves in sports and physical activities to ensure that their moods and their health is in good shape. But in addition to that, of course, sports and sports for development, as we already talked, has a very long history of playing a role in terms of working towards achieving some of the sustainable development goals. And it has been used broadly, to fight pandemics, HIV/AIDS, but that use largely had been on mobilizing human resource, to mobilize communities. But now with the COVID pandemic, we can't mobilize because then it will thrive there, right? But then sport can still play a role, Doc, in the sense that we can use and a lot of organizations are already using high-profile athletes, right, who have huge numbers of followers to actually share messages of preventing the COVID-19 pandemic. Apart from that, sport, given that it has a broad network of people, we can tap into those networks to digitally share information on prevention of COVID-19 disease. And given that the sports industry has a history of mobilizing resources, it's possible to mobilize resources and buy materials that can be shared to vulnerable communities, to COVID-19 materials to share, that can be shared to vulnerable communities to prevent the spread of the pandemic. Organizations in Zambia like Sports in Action are already doing a great job. I saw the National Olympic Committee of Zambia, where Mr. Kambikambi is General Secretary. I saw them distributing COVID-19 prevention materials to young people. I saw the Zambia Judo Federation also doing a great job in that area, because we are pulling our insights from the history of the use of sports as a tool for development, because we already have built enough knowledge and insights in that, and sports there definitely then is playing a critical role.
That's wonderful. As an academician, do you think we do have opportunities around the possibility of learning as far as coronavirus and sport are concerned in terms of research?
Yes, Doc, immense opportunities, a lot of opportunities, because like we already discussed, there is a need, a serious need to bridge the gap between academicians or scholars like myself and practitioners, to make sure that then we combine forces, research and practice, to make sure that then we keep up with the evolving trends in performance, in elite performance, in terms of sports exercise psychology, nutrition, biomechanics, sports medicine, physiotherapy, and a lot of those aspects. So there is a great opportunity there to actually collaborate and bridge the gaps, because you find that practitioners are saying, these scholars, they don't know anything. And the scholars are saying, practitioners know nothing. Right? So, but we need to bridge that gap. And that is what is enhancing performance in developed countries. So we need to bridge, to take a scientific route. And you cannot take a scientific approach to sports without seriously bridging the gap between practitioners and scholars, because the scholars are the ones that have capabilities to research. Because the research is not about just going on Google. No, it's about tapping into serious networks that are not existing on Google, serious resources that you cannot find on Google. Zambia, for example, we don't affiliate to a lot of journals where sports science material is shared. So there is an opportunity here to open our minds and hearts and collaborate for the sake of ourselves and our people and our own pride, because sport is our national pride. So there is a very great opportunity there, Doc. And then secondly, we already talked about the opportunity that actually the COVID-19 pandemic has opened our eyes in terms of the use of digital platforms, that actually we don't necessarily need to be there to share insights, right? The past few months, I had been having lectures with my master's degree students, with the scholars in the US, in the UK, wherever we know that we don't have these insights here. And this can apply as well to sports practice. Wherever we know that we don't have insights in sports biomechanics or sports media, for example, my students had 2 lectures with a colleague of mine, Dr. Gerard Akindes, who is in Qatar. Lectures with colleagues that are in the US, my former PhD supervisor, Professor Peter Aleji, colleagues that are in Brazil, all these specialists. So the COVID-19 has opened our eyes that actually we can utilize these platforms even beyond the pandemic. So that I feel is a very good kind of lesson that we have learned from COVID. And above all, we have actually realized that COVID has brought to the fore that there is need to really deeply research and develop knowledge on sports and exercise during pandemics. Because then, the pandemic caught us unaware, and here we are, our athletes are stuck in their homes. So research on sports and exercise during pandemics can help us open our insights in terms of how then do we ensure that we support these athletes with physical, exercise and training and mental preparation, nutritional preparation. How do we support these athletes, right? So this requires for a generation of a body of knowledge that would support our athletes, because lately now we had been working under pressure. Evidence has been coming out that no, you cannot run with a mask because you affect your respiratory system. And then another research pops out. So you know what? Actually, runners are more susceptible to infect each other with the coronavirus because the projection of exhaled air is stronger.
Absolutely.
So you need a longer distance. Maybe over 3 meters if you are running, to make sure that you don't infect the next person. So this is the research that we need to invest our efforts into.
Doc, finally, what would be your last word to all sports administrators in Zambia, or coaches included, and perhaps athletes, especially those who are nearing retirement, in terms of capacity building? Do they have enough opportunities in Zambia to develop their skills? Management-wise, administration, and not just coaching.
Sure, Doc. Experience is very important. So a lot of respect to especially sports administrators, coaches that are moving into this field. Experience playing is very important, but then they also need to enrich their insights with broad research and engagement. And this is where collaboration comes in, Doc, and training in terms of short courses like offered by, the National Olympic Committee, and universities should develop intense programs to actually bridge these gaps in terms of, sports management, sports administration, and other aspects that our colleagues that have massive experience in terms of having been athletes that want to transition into sports administrators and managers. So we have massive resources. And in addition to that, Doc, we cannot ignore experience. So those that have been sports administrators for a long time should be given an opportunity and workshops to share their insights and experiences. And this will help us not to repeat the mistakes that have been done in the past, because experienced administrators already know some of the things that work and that do not work based on their experience. So it's important that we combine academic perspectives and experience and build a pool of very strong and well-informed sports administrators and reduce on politics. Because some people argue that actually there's more politics in sports than in politics, right? So
I never knew until I got closer.
That's right, Doc. Yeah, there is indeed a lot of politics in sports, such that maybe it might even be more than in politics itself. So we should put actually the development of our sport, center stage to ensure that we mobilize, and we should avoid camps like scholars. No, those, no, this camp for that one. Let's put our heads together so that we learn from each other's insights. Let's open our hearts and share, right, these insights. And that's why, Doc, in my case, for example, where I work at the University of Zambia, I invite, and I was in the process of inviting you, I invite practitioners, experienced practitioners, to come and share with my students their insights. Because, we need to democratize knowledge, and no one has a monopoly of knowledge in sports.
Absolutely.
So it's important that we open up and get as much as we can. For scholars, for my students, master's degree students, I invite sports practitioners, those that have worked for a long time in the field, to come and share their experiences. Mr. Boniface Kambi, the General Secretary of the NOCZ, gave a lecture to the students, and he's scheduled to give another one this year. And a number of people, Mr. Elias Mpondela, who has many years of sports administration, and many others. So that is the only way we can kind of enrich ourselves. We need to democratize knowledge to ensure that we get it from wherever we can to enrich ourselves, so that then we foster sports administration and management in our country.
Dr. Chipende, thank you so much for joining us today on coronavirus and you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chitangala. It was a great pleasure being here, and I'm humbled.
I'm actually the one who should be saying I'm humbled, because from what you've said, we've learned quite a lot. And we had quite a huge following on social media, and also people that are watching us live on TV. They are they would agree with me that this was very insightful. And I hope that, again, perhaps one of these days, you'll be available to come back and discuss another perspective of this topic.
I'll be very happy to be here, Doc. Thank you.
There you are, viewers. Thank you so much. For those that joined us on social media, YouTube and Facebook, and including those that were watching us live on Topstar, Channel 96, and Movie TV Bouquet, Channel 14, thank you. Next time, next week, we'll be discussing another very important topic of coronavirus and you. In the meantime, please always remember, your health is your choice. Bye-bye.
Nalelo batani kokoliko.
ZambiaMusicBlog.co.
I'm thankful that I'm living again.